Thank you. I want to talk to you guys today about a practical approach that we took to view hydration. First off, who am I? My name is Stacey Trooster. Some of you know me. We were indeed the host last year for StripeCon. I'm a full stack developer. This talk is very front-end focused, but my work goes back-end and front-end. In fact, while most of the bugs I run into in the front end, I really don't like the front end very much. So, but I do it. I've got quite a bit of experience. I did survive the Netscape years. I mean, browser compatibility issues from the get-go. And we've been SilverStripe fans with Lemonade since day one, actually, since they went open source, since the very first version that went open source. But what we do today, or what I do today, I do have experience in combining legacy stacks with all kinds of shiny new things, older stuff, and even Java sites, putting SilverStripe on top of that kind of thing. But also we do full applications from scratch, and including the UI and the UX design. But enough about me. Let's talk about front end. It's a great field where all kinds of stuff is happening, and I want to start with a question. How many JavaScript developers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, we'll take one to rebuild the ladder from scratch. Take another one, and he'll say it's not ergonomic enough, and she'll say it's not aesthetic enough, and there's another one that says it's not asynchronous enough, and then we'll need another one that says it's not modular enough, and then what were we trying to do again? I'm not picking on JavaScript or JavaScript developers, don't worry. It's a great field, and it's a great tool, and it's a great language, and it's fantastic, but jokes usually have a kernel of truth to it. So for a recent project, we were starting from scratch. So we were able to throw away the whole old stack and reevaluate everything from front end to back end, and this focuses on our front end reevaluation part of it. What could be better? What could be fancier? Can we get some cool, single page app type stuff in there? We've already been experimenting with using Vue here and there. We see all the shiny new SPA type stuff happening all around us. We're starting off with a clean slate, so let's see what we can use, what we need to do it. So let me take you down the rabbit hole and give you a quick summary of how application building with front-end technologies goes. So I'm looking around the single-page app playing field. I'm wondering what kind of stack we'll need to get there, and we'll start with picking some type of flavor, React, Angular. In our case, we really like Vue for multiple reasons. I'll explain that in a bit. And we'll start off with some kind of, state, because that's kind of the point. So we'll start off with our first bundle bloat and our first 50 hours of configging the thing and the boilerplating. We'll break some stuff, but we'll repair it as well. So we'll certainly add some browser compatibility issues to our stack. And apparently we'll break more stuff, but we'll repair that too. Because, performance issues are what dreams are made of, right? And then we'll break that. But yeah, then who needs CO when you have like shiny new things and new front ends and everything's sparkly and fresh, right? But we'll break that, or we'll fix that. We'll cause a few more issues. And according to Google, they can read JavaScript-only sites, but how well do they really read it? And what about all the other search engines? There are many, but there are other search engines. And look very closely there. We'll repair CO, among a few other things, with server-side rendered JavaScript. Now, I thought JavaScript was client-side. I know PHP renders on the server, but JavaScript on the server, that's supposed to be client-side only, right? Well, oops. Apparently, not entirely. Normally, in a single-page app setup, there's only one single index HTML file, for those of you who don't know the whole SPA setup. The index.html is basically empty. This is not a simplified SPA index.html. This is an actual index.html file that you could see in a single-page app. Basically, it's empty. It has an empty basically empty body tag. It has one script tag that it pulls in. And this script will do all the magic on the client side. So it'll pull in all the data it needs, the JSON it needs, all the other stuff it needs, and do everything on the client side. That's the client side rendering, I thought. But then, when we realized we broke all kinds of stuff, and that Google doesn't like reading empty index.htmls, we'll throw a black box in there, we'll run that through the black box, and for whatever flavor you're picking, there's different black boxes. Like for Vue, there's Nux.js, it does a server-side rendering. There's Express, I think Angular has one as well, but for all simplified purposes, there's a black box that you run the SPA through, and it fills it with a little bit more content. So hopefully Google's a little bit happier. There's a little bit more information on the side of the client before the client does and takes over and does all the rest. There's still, again, a lot of bootstrapping happening on the client side because there's still that one JavaScript being loaded, and there's still a lot of magic happening on that when that goes up. But the level of expertise needed makes my head spin a little bit. And I've heard a lot of talks, and I've heard a lot of podcasts, and I read a lot of articles, and server-side rendering of JavaScript is really, really tough to get set up right. If you have a simple app and they have one purpose for it, like for example for mobile or whatever, fine. But we have a website. That's our entire setup. So yeah, I know all the front-enders are thinking, wow, she's really old, and I am probably. I don't get how cool single-page apps with React and Vue are, and especially if you would hear the case that I'm using this for, which is a car-selling website where you configure cars and you tell on the car you can tell whether you want a sunroof, which color you want, and it really sounds SPA-able. But I'm also old enough to see many projects go wildly out of control, go over budget, and with unhappy clients and bad performance just because they wanted to build fantastic technical things instead of actual practical code. So I'm looking at our new project, and I'm wondering, do we really need a full SPA? Because what's wrong with server-side rendered content? And I ran into this quote, which I think basically sums it up. We shouldn't be breaking performance by using an SPA and then limiting the damage. We should take the well-performing server render and make it even better. And that's Jake Archibald. He's developer advocate for Google. I highly recommend his talks on YouTube, by the way. Oops. So SPA technology is certainly not everything to everybody. And at this point in my research, I was thinking, okay, fine, applications, I get it. Behind login, I get it. But if Google needs to reach it, if performance is an issue, and if a whole bunch of other things are on our list of must-haves, I'm wondering about the usefulness in websites. So we're back to the drawing board and seeing what we actually need to do in this project. Like I said, it's a website about cars. You go there to lease a car. So you want to tell them what kind of car you want, choose a car. You want to actually say what color you want, what sunroof you want, and all kinds of other options. And we're rebuilding this site from scratch. We have all the opportunity to pick whatever we want, which is, dream, because I was supporting that site, and I'm happy to be rid of the old code. It was from 2011, was the oldest code that was in there, so this house of cards really had to go. And like I said, it sells products, and it's very, very core to the company that's using it. It pulls in a lot of visitors and a lot of revenue. It's very high traffic. And a lot of it was running on Java or jQuery, the front end. A lot of the sites from Darkly still are running on jQuery. Over time, we made a lot of responsiveness updates and performance updates here and there. And we also chose Vue in certain places to use for that because it hydrates or it integrates really well, especially if you already have a jQuery site, for example, and you're like, well, I just want part to be fancier and new language. We'll just use Vue for that single little part. It goes really well with legacy type stuff. So this website, what are we looking at here? We're looking at, all three of them come up right away. Okay. We're looking at high traffic. We need great SEO, really, really good SEO, search engine optimized. We need really, really good performance because it's a very high traffic site. The Lighthouse score, the Google Lighthouse score, the audits that you can do in Chrome, was actually part of a target that we had as a development team. And there's a lot of revenue, so we need to keep it up, and we need to keep it scoring. This is also, like I said, they sell cars. This is not a technology company. So we require easy content editing. We'll enter SilverStripe CMS and framework. We wanted really fancy content editing, so we're adding elemental content blocks as well. So server rendered content. We also have a few API connections underneath, but we could turn everything into JSON or go headless, but do we really need to? And number 3, we want some SPA type stuff in isolated places. We also prefer hydration to have the experience with it, to retrofit it better into the other sites that we have. And we have the option left over, if we use Vue, which is very nice, to have mini SPAs in specific isolated cases. Specific isolated places within the site, I should say, actually. So under the hood, what we're working towards is starting with server rendered HTML from SilverStripe. So if you remember earlier, I said there's one index.html. That's not going to fly in this case. We'd also like the JavaScript to be efficiently split into bundles, and we like to only load the stuff that we need and only when we need it. I'm sure you're all familiar with task runners or things like Gulp and Grunt, and maybe heard of a bundle manager like Browserify. For our purposes, we use Webpack because it's like the Swiss Army knife. It minifies, it bundles, and it loads stuff on demand, and I'll show you. What we're trying to do again is hydration. So we're not going the full SPA route. We're using Vue only in specific parts and specific areas that we need it to. In fact, in this specific case, we use Vue everywhere. We don't use jQuery at all. But the hydration part comes in when you actually do give Vue a rendered HTML, and it turns that into a dynamic DOM that it can work with. While normally in the SPA route, it builds its own dynamic DOM. So we're adding Webpack to our stack. This does a lot for us. I'll go ahead and open those. Oh, good grief. There. It'll do a lot for us. We don't want to use like any kind of presets or anything like that. We really want to custom config it, because once you do that, yeah, you really don't go back. It makes it way more powerful. It will do the tasks that we need it to do. It will also do bundling and dynamic importing. Number 2 is we really want, this is also part of the SEO demand, we really want to keep as much interesting data as possible rendered in the HTML. Every time we decide to pull in JSON from someplace, it's really hard to see if the search engines will really read it or not. So let's just make an effort to do as much rendered in the HTML as possible. JSON loading is fine for things that are not deemed relevant for SEO in our case, but anything that's SEO rendered, it has to be server-side rendered HTML. Portal view is another trick we'll use. It also helps to keep everything rendered in HTML. I'll show you that in a bit. And finally, we split our bundles efficiently and only load them when we need it. We can make really good use of device-dependent bundle loading. So only when you visit the site with a certain type of device. So what does code splitting look like? I don't know if you have any kind of familiarity with Vue. Anybody work with Vue before at all? Seen Vue, React? Yeah, okay, React probably a little bit more maybe. Anybody work with React? Oh, not as much as I thought it would be. Okay. Vue has components. Components are, well, they are what they are. It's componentized and, yeah, on its own type of bundle, and it has HTML in it. This template part has script in it, has CSS in it, and it's all containerized to be a specific component that you can include in other places. All 3 of these things, the template part, the HTML part, the script, and the CSS, are optional. You can leave them blank, so you can, for example, have only a component that includes some CSS, which is really handy for our bundling thing I'll get back to. The entry point, we have one Vue instance that we start up, and that builds Vue, and that view page will then know which components to load and which bundles to load. But let's see how the architecture, or what a rough architecture in SPA would look like. Again, a single page app has a single index.html up there, and it loads one single, usually, a main JavaScript. And whenever you visit any routes from that index.html, it'll see whichever pieces it needs, and it'll load those things on the fly. Now from this diagram, you can see this doesn't really work very well with a SilverStripe setup where you have multiple pages because, again, the single index.html. This is something that you might be familiar with if you've done any kind of JavaScript code splitting or bundling or anything like that. You'll have the SS pages, like home, about us, content, something like that, and then you'll have a couple of different JavaScript files. Maybe some of them will share one of them, fine. And you'll have some kind of shared code. And, you know, there's caching to do with that kind of stuff. And the issue I always run into is what's shared and when is it shared? When does it become shared? If you look at things like Elemental being introduced now on the front end as well, there's like maybe, I don't know, 25 Elemental blocks that content editors could use. Do we include all the JS, all the CSS in the shared code for the Elemental blocks, just in case they do use them? Yeah, there's caching to be done, but it's always been a question. So now I'm thinking something a little bit more mixed. So we have the SilverStripe pages, which again have their entry points. But the entry point includes the main JS, which knows which bundles to load when, because it sees the tags being used on the page, the components being used on the page, and it's like, okay, well, I need a navigation component. I'll just grab all the JS and CSS from that. And this page doesn't need a carousel component, so I'll skip that, and collapse isn't needed, but I'll pull in a modal window because I do need that on this page. That's kind of what we're working towards. Now, Webpack, a con for using Webpack, it is really set up for single-page app stuff. So on all the documentation and a lot of the tutorials that you'll read, they'll assume that you're working on a single-page app. They'll assume that you want to generate a single entry point, a single JS that's all-knowing and all trafficking, that arranges everything. It knows which chunks to get loaded and when. And if you do read about that on the web, you'll see HTML Webpack plugin a lot, because everything's based on that. HTML Webpack plugin actually creates an index.html while you're running Webpack, and it will plop all the JavaScript and the CSS in there that it's needed to do its magic on the client side. Which again, all that's not useful in our case because we have multiple server rendered templates. So it becomes quite complicated if you go that route. But Webpack can create bundles, and it can load them when we need it. There's awareness in the entry point. At least the entry point can see when certain tags are used, and again, those bundles will be included. Like, for example, when you click on a certain button, like a login button, then the login component, the CSS, JavaScript, and whatever HTML we put in there will be loaded. Or when a component is used in HTML, so anywhere in the SilverStripe template file, then when it's rendered in the browser, then load that component. And it helps performance immensely. So step one, setting up Webpack. Here we have a simple entry list. I'll come back to the long list of entries later, but for now, it's easy to read. The About Us page entry point comes from the aboutus.js, etc., etc. And then we have a main, and the main I'll show you in a minute. It tells you exactly what tags do we run into in our HTML, can we run into in our HTML, and what bundles to include if we do run into that. And then we have a little bit of output as well. And it tells Webpack to give the bundles that it generates specific names, because otherwise it's gibberish. There's letters, strings, whatever in there, because normally Webpack does all that stuff on the fly in the client anyway. But now we want to add in SilverStripe in there, so we need predictable and readable bundle names. And this is where the splitting magic happens. We tell Webpack, look, split all the chunks. There's different ways it can split chunks. It can split just the initial chunks, so just the About Us page and the things that we mentioned earlier, and the entry points. It can split just the async stuff. It's all the stuff it pulls in on runtime. But in this case, we want it to split everything as efficiently as it possibly can, because that's the power of Webpack. The min and max size and the min chunks are just personal preference. I set this to 6 in this specific case in the demo. But it's the number of chunks needed to contain a module before it's moved into the components, the common chunk. So it's all just a little bit of personal configuring. The name part, name common, tells Webpack to create a common chunk. This is a chunk which contains all the stuff we'll need everywhere. So that is actually a shared bundle, but it's a shared bundle that's calculated by Webpack. So it's always going to be more efficient than the shared bundle that I would create by hand. And this is pretty obvious if you've worked with Webpack and Vue, but we'll need a loader that explains to Webpack what in the world a Vue file is. So we'll need that as well. Then, once we start importing components, we'll have our async component in the async component.vue file. And you'd be tempted to, in your JavaScript file, say import from that file name and then attach it to your Vue instance. However, this is static and it's resolved at compile time. And what we need is a way to dynamically load this specific component when we want it to get the benefits of code splitting. So this magic import command, it tells Webpack and Vue, look, there's an async component there. I'd like you to make it available to dynamically load. That's line 24. I like to split this out into its own chunk and name it. This isn't really necessary, the specific actual name on there, the Webpack chunk name. It's not necessary, but it really helps reading the network tab in the browser when you're seeing all this stuff load in. And we'd also like you to load it whenever we run into the component tag. So whenever we run or use the async component tag in the HTML when it's encountered, go ahead and load that file in the background. Now imagine this together with elemental. And I'll say that a few more times down the presentation because every single elemental block can have its own specific component. So when the content editor says I want this specific elemental block A and elemental block M and elemental block Z, I don't have to load the entire alphabet. I only load the actual blocks and the actual CSS and JavaScript and or whatever else I need for that specific elemental block on load time. This is another example. This is a syntax thing. I'm not, JavaScript syntax is really not my thing. I always argue with it every time. So this is the specific example of how to import a part or component out of Bootstrap Vue, which is one of my favorite libraries, but it's really hard to get it right. So imports, the point is here is that imports, they return promises. So depending on what kind of libraries you're loading here, you'll have to return that one specific way or another. And number two, we wanted to render all the HTML in the SilverStripe templates. So if search engines come by and read this, this will be similar to, or this would actually be what you would do in Vue in a SilverStripe template if you wanted to use Vue. You'd say, I'll have a carousel and I have multiple slides and grab the slide index in slides, the slides part of it. That's actually a JSON that gets pulled in somewhere. So all that data comes in from JSON from the sites. Basically either invisible or hard to read for Google, I would say. Google itself is very hard to read about whether they properly read JavaScript-only websites for SEO purposes. They say that they do, but there are forums full of things that we have run into in our sites that they don't properly read it in some specific cases. Now the issue I have here is do I really want to turn these slides into JSON? Or can we just do this? And this is what an actual SilverStripe template would look like in our specific case. All this HTML, full name, email address, even the photo, gets loaded into, you can actually see it in the view source. Google can read it, not a problem, very clean. And we do that by using the virtual nodes in the virtual DOM. Basically, we're making Vue work a little bit harder. Vue offers functional components. That's the vnode part here, the functional true. And it's a component that holds no state, no instance. It's just there. We just use it or misuse it to take a render context and return it to the rendered, to return the rendered HTML vnode. They offer a lot of speed, and for our specific purposes, it offers a way to not have to take a side route and make JSON out of something that we could just simply render in a template and have readable for Google. Then there's Portal View. The point 3 and 4 and the responsiveness I want to talk together because I have an example that shows both of them. Another thing that you run into if you don't go the full SPA route, that you have HTML that might be outside your app, or it might be rendered in a place where you're thinking, okay, now I have this HTML there, but I actually want it in another place as well. Portal is great for that kind of stuff. Basically, what you can tell Portal is, I have a piece of code here. Yeah, you have a portal over there that has now $ content in it, and we wanted to use it in multiple components. We don't want to pass that same thing to both places because we want to have it rendered in the actual template as well. So we want to be able to see it. So when this renders in SilverStripe and you view the source, you will actually see the tag portal, and it will have all the content, whatever that is, the HTML, and it'll say end content. And Vue will make this magic below here happen. So it will take that content out of the rendered HTML and put it wherever we need to. If we're on the desktop, it'll load the desktop component and throw it there. If we're on the mobile component, it will load the mobile mobile device. It'll load the mobile component and it will throw that content into there. Either way, the rendering part, whichever device we're on, that's a simple, switch for if it's mobile or not. Either way, the portal information, the content that's in there, the HTML that's in there, it's rendered into the template. Covered that. That's the simple check. Not very exciting. But in combination with the portal, again, instead of sending that content to those different components and doing everything twice or 3 times, we put it in one place and we grab it whenever we need to. So, demo time. I have some code to show. This tabbing worked earlier. Can everybody read that? Halfway decent? Okay. Now I'm going to have to practice moving my mouse properly. But here we have Webpack. This is a simple Webpack setup. There are our entry points. Let's see, we have, for this specific demo, of course, everything is kept very simple. So we have a very simple Vue instance here in the About Us. All this About Us does really is load some page-specific CSS, and it starts a Vue instance, because we can only have one Vue instance per page, so this specific About Us page says, okay, we'll do that. Now we have, for example, the home page. It's a little bit more different, or a little different. Includes Portal View as well, because we only want Portal View to actually be used on the home page in this case. So only be in that bundle. And then we have main, which is included by every single, which basically a shared JavaScript file. Now here's where all the magic happens. For example, if we say we want the Navbar plugin from Bootstrap. Maybe you guys are familiar with Bootstrap. This is just a plugin in the library. In the documentation, they say to do it this way. Method 1. They say import plugin. Okay, so that means that the plugin data, and that's a lot of stuff because this is all duplicate. That's a lot of stuff. It's all in the main JavaScript. So you get big, huge bundles. It's very inefficient tree shaking, so it doesn't remove any of the stuff that you're not using. So it's all in there. So no bueno, we have method 1. This is what this looks like. This is an actual production build. So we have a common bundle of 187 kilobytes. Yeah, method 1. Now, method 2, let me comment that out because that's going to, cause problems. This is harder than I thought, doing it sideways. Huh. There we go. Another common way is to use deep imports. And then we can be more specific and we can say, oh, we only want that specific component. We don't want all the other crap that's involved in it because we're only using these specific things. It's better, but there's still lots of unnecessary overhead being included, and you're very dependent on who built the libraries. And it's all, again, included in the main bundle, and it's loaded on every single page, and you might not need it on every single page. Here we have another way, that's the dynamic import route, where we take the deep import links and we dynamically import them. These are all on one line. It's not my preference, but my Babel minify gave an error when I ran this and put it on separate lines, so I don't know. I'll fix that before I put it in GitHub, but that's why it's all on one line. But this is just the dynamic import. Let's see. And I put a console log in there because I love console logs. They're a very handy way of debugging. Now this is one way to do it, but we will end up with a lot of different bundles. Let's see, 3 looks like this. So you have a lot of different little tiny mini bundles, which HTTP2, it's not that big of a deal, but this is quite, for the single navigation bar, that's maybe a little bit overdoing it. So we have here method number 4. So we componentize it, and that way we have one bundle for the navbar component. If we open the navbar component, it includes all the little tiny mini 1 or less kilobyte JavaScript type stuff it needs. It moves it together and it creates one single bundle, and it loads whenever we need it, and there we go. So we have the chunk navbar component CSS separated out, and we have the chunk navbar component over here separated out. And it's not in our common bundle. See it reduced down to 130 kilobytes. So there's that. And what else did I want to show here? Yeah, and I want to show the templates. It's very hard to read on this side of the stage. About us page. Now here we have the carousel. It's very recognizable for SilverStripe developers, obviously, just to see the actual code in there instead of all kinds of JSON magic happening. And then we have a home page. We're using the same carousel here. This is the exact same bundle, the exact same little tiny bit of JavaScript, little tiny bit of CSS, because it's the same carousel. It looks totally different. And I'll show you how it looks. No? Nope. Where did it go? Where did it go? Oh, it went over here. That's our common bundle. Now I lost my cursor as well. Wow, that's a really big dev console. Okay. There we go. This is the About Us page. Very boring, very boring. Not even loading, actually. Do we have internet? And we have a... Okay, this is great. This is not working. These are elemental things, and if you see here in the network tab, if I reload that, this is the home page, and we'll just use, JavaScript's fine. We'll see here that element 1 and element 2, I can't read it from this side of the stage, but I'm sure they're in there. Those are the ones that are loaded. If I would unpublish element 1, that bundle would not get loaded. So we wouldn't load that JS, we wouldn't load that CSS that's involved. We see here as well the carousel component. It's the same carousel component that we used on another page. It's the exact same JavaScript. This one has, oh gosh, really big images. Really big. And this one has a little bit smaller images, but has 3 next to each other. Same carousel, a couple of settings, same JavaScript, same bundle, same thing. So it's really efficient with caching and everything as well. Let's see, I have this demo up on GitHub, and I will share the code with you so you can see a few things and how we did it. This is another example about with forms and all the validation that goes with that, because you don't need that validation kind of stuff in your main shared code or bundle or whatever you want to call it. You want to only load that when you actually need it, and generally you only need it in very, very few spaces in your site, and it usually blips your bundle if you don't do that. So we have, back to our presentation. We have here the site that we were working on, Directly's private.nl, and I wish we would have gotten everything done and I could have showed you the live site, but we only have it in dev right now. So, but I have a before and after. It will be an after at some point, hopefully next week or the week after. So this is the actual live site. You can see here, this is Lighthouse. I don't know if you guys know Lighthouse, but it's in the DevTools tab. Audits, run the audit, and you see all the information that you need to make your website run faster and better, and you can see what Google thinks about your site. This is the current live site. Not super proud of that performance, 58. The SEO is perfect. We have a really good SEO guys who took care of all that. Performance not super awesome because we did not split and do everything to the T yet. So we're getting there. We're also going to still add some image optimization and some caching as well, so that make it even better. But with the perfect splitting and the perfect code bundling, and if you have everything split out the way it should and only load what you need, then we have on the test server at the moment, this is the next gen website that will be live again, hopefully next week or the week after. There you can see the performance went up to 92. And that was using the techniques that I had in the previous slides to the T. Don't look at the SEO score because this is the dev server and we have index no robots, so that's not going to fly well for the SEO score. So ignore that. So the SEO score of the live site will actually be a 97, and then for the new deploy we'll do hopefully next week, the performance will go up to 92. And this works for us for now. Is this setup we have ideal for everybody? No. Just like jumping on the SPA bandwagon isn't ideal for everybody either. This works for us in our current landscape. We have multiple sites running for Directly's. Some are on SS3, some on SS4, some with jQuery, some with, some fully Vue, some hybrid Vue or halfway Vue. And the grace of Vue is that you can gradually drop it in whenever you need it and where you need it. We have spots on our websites where we can run a mini SPA, like in the login. If you configured your car, you want to save your car, you want to come back to your quotes that you have and whatever, we can run a mini SPA in that specific spot. So instead of having a itty bitty little mini view file, we'll have a longer one that has all kinds of stuff in it and a little bit of routes and things. But that can be behind the login, and we don't need to worry about that for the main website. There's still a couple of unresolved problems we have that we're still working on, even though with the dev server score that you just saw, we're still working on a few things. There is an easy Webpack fix, apparently, if you use the HTML Webpack plugin, that automatically adds all kinds of preload tags to your for your CSS files and your and JS files that you will need at some point. Because at that particular time, Webpack knows this. So it knows which files you will eventually need, and it knows to add the preload links to it. I'm wondering if we need to do this through Webpack, because we won't be able to, probably. We're also evaluating caching, HTTP server pushing, that kind of stuff. So maybe that'll solve the problem for us. but that's still a question mark at this point. Critical CSS, again, Webpack needs access to the index, the single index.html to see what is critical. We don't have that. I've played with the idea of having it run through the cache directory, but I think that would be a mess as well. So I think we're going to go another route and maybe optimize in other areas to get that better. We do have some must-haves and nice-to-haves, things that are definitely going to be on the list that we have solutions for now. We're looking at broadleads, new type of GSIP. We're looking at image optimization, so the cloudinary thing will definitely be on our list to evaluate. With the new SS4 asset structure, we'll need to see what we have access to, and I really doubt Webpack will be able to deal with any of this, so we'll probably look at services, cloudinary, yeah, maybe SS3, yeah, S3 will help as well, I don't know, we'll have to see. We have a little bit of Flash event-styled content. We probably should be inserting some kind of, CSS skeletons or something that you could see before the actual content replaces it. We'll be working on that. There's some quite a bit of main thread work because a lot of the stuff that I am loading is UI stuff. So we are looking at simple little service workers and web workers to help with the main thread JavaScript issues or minor issues that we have. And you saw that I added, for every single page we had in the SilverStripe site, I added a single JavaScript entry point. We want to reduce that boilerplate a little bit. For now, it's readable and it's fine. We're not going over like 50, we don't have like 50 pages in a SilverStripe site or anything like that. It's most like 10, 15 maybe. So it's doable now. But ideally, we'd like to reduce that boilerplate and auto-generate maybe some entry points, or maybe auto-include the entry points that we do generate in the requirements or something like that. And that's what we're looking at as well. So, thank you. That's it for now. And I do have the link to the GitHub demo up here. I'd recommend looking at that after next weekend when I have some time to add some documentation to it. Because it works right now, but it could add a little bit more. Yeah, at least a README file I'll add to it by then. So yeah, it's probably best. Does anybody have any questions? Or any feedback or any ideas about any of the stuff I had we have problems on?
Thank you a lot for the very interesting talk. It's nice to see that we all have the same problems. It's exactly what we were discussing at our company. It's really difficult to combine this flexible structure with blocks, with some kind like entry points, and I guess it's definitely the way to go to load per block some JavaScript and CSS on demand with HTTP 2, and so it's really, I guess, the best idea to make it. At least that is my opinion. Just to add something to the discussion about SPAs, we had a customer which had an SPA solution which was all dynamically loading. He has some PHP to make a server-rendered version only for the Google search engine bot, and it was a nightmare. It was a bad performance. It was bad CEO. So we made essentially the same as you have suggested. We've re-implemented it in SilverStripe with classical server rendering, and we have some tiny spots where there is, in terms of a progressive enhancement, a few components loaded, and yeah, I guess that's in most cases the better solutions for this kind of problems.
Yeah, we see that a lot with, or we hear that a lot too with. The thing is, it's fantastic, React and Vue and all the SPA type stuff, but if you have requirements before you start a project, and if one of the requirements is performance in CO, consider rendering stuff on the server. Consider if that is an option at all, because Google likes it. It likes a readable source, so yeah.
Yeah. Also we have also changed, for example, if you have some kind of a list, we had times where we just returned a structured JSON, which was really beautiful. You have the title field, the image, and so on. but it's really difficult. For example, if you have a responsive image set, we have already a solution for server-side generated content, but if you pass it via a JSON, it's getting difficult. You need a client-side solution as well. So in most cases, it's good to use the tools we have and don't reinvent it again just to have it in JavaScript.
And be practical.
Yeah. One more question,
Yeah.
just a practical one. Regarding Lighthouse, you can run it in the developer tools, but there's also a hosted solution by Google. The scores are often quite different. Are you having any experience with that, or
Yes, and
how did you this issue as well?
I can share with you the thread in, I think it was GitHub where they discussed this. It is a thread that runs, I think, 2 years ago, or whenever they implemented, I think last year, a year and a half ago. Until yesterday or this week, they've still posting angry messages on there saying, why is page speed different than Lighthouse? Because the Lighthouse engine, whatever you want to call it, is supposed to be under page speed, but it's completely different. And the thing is too, if you visit Lighthouse a few times, of course you'll have different things with latency and the Wi-Fi that you're on and whatever, that's fine. But the average will be very, very, very close if you do it like 5 times in a day in the same place. Page speed can go all over the place for some reason. And the page speed, if my client looks at page speed index and puts a site in there, it can be totally different than if I do it. Yeah. They don't have a good explanation for that yet. Personally, I think if I read all the stuff in that thread, I think that they did not do a full implementation of Lighthouse under page speed at this point. They're not responding, so they don't have a good answer.
Oh, thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Thanks. I really enjoyed the talk because I'm quite old-fashioned as well. And
thank you.
Do you think you reach a bit of a tipping point because your strategy is about chunking up an increasing number of smaller JavaScript files? At some point, does the network latency and the connections sort of outweigh the benefit of reducing the total file payload, or is that something you've find a sweet spot with, or is it just always better to serve smaller files?
We found that, especially with the HTTP2 that we now have on the server as well, it's not an issue anymore, the small files. There's also things like, we have not done yet in the directly site, which we can do, is there's ways to only load things when you actually get to them, like lazy loading, where things come into the viewport kind of a thing. We've not done that yet. We're lazy doing that because some stuff is in the footer and we don't need it when we're in the header and people go into the next page and they'll never need it. So there's stuff to do like that as well. There's also a few things that we could put behind a button or a click. All the login stuff will go behind a click type thing. So in the end, it's doable. It's doable for the HTTP2 promise with loading tons of little files. It's happened for us, so we're not running into major issues yet, and we still have a few things up our sleeves if we do.
Great.
Great talk, thanks. Just to follow up on that, one of the things that that people don't also consider is JavaScript execution time, especially on mobiles. Mm-hmm. The more you load in, you're going to start burning your battery down. You can kind of, so that's also a consideration in terms of nowadays a lot of people are on mobile, and it's also a speed thing. You're hitting that CPU, it might get throttled and whatever else. So
yeah.
So bringing in only the stuff you need is also important.
Yeah, and especially with mobile, because like I said, the main thread we have a little bit of an issue with. We're not scoring super high yet in the Lighthouse scores with the newer release that we have ready, because the main thread work is a little bit on the high side. And again, we can lower that kind of stuff, especially on mobile, by only loading the stuff that if you really scroll down to the bottom of the page, then we'll load that stuff that you really need down there. And that'll help too. Anybody else? Any feedback or ideas or questions?
Great talk. I have a SEO question. I know. I saw that what happens now is you have tags that are not really standard tags, carousel, stuff like that. And that's actually what Google's going to read directly. Mm-hmm. Do you think that will affect SEO somehow?
No.
All right.
No, it will not, because we use proper semantic HTML and other places. And if you have, for example, you have a list, Google loves lists, like Johanna said the other day, Google loves lists. If you have an LI and you have one of those new fancy tags in there, as long as the structure itself is recognized by Google, it'll eat that stuff up. It's generally, we've not had any kind of issues with that at all. So, yeah. Anybody else?
No? So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.